We're back with our Roughhouse 50 scooter rescue project. Now in our last couple videos we did some general maintenance, then we went ahead and installed that new carburetor, got that dialed in a little bit, playing with the idle adjustment screw. Now that we've got that done, we put the whole body panels back on. We've got it looking like a scooter again. It starts up, it runs. We'll give you a quick example. Key on, kill switch, and there you go. We've got a running scooter. It looks okay, but now it's important to make sure it rolls and stops safely. So in today's video, we're going to take a look at the brakes on the scooter. The first thing we're going to do for our brakes is address the front half of the scooter. This is the important brake. It brings us to that good stop with the disc up front. So we're going to take off plastic gauge cowl up here so that we have access to our master brake cylinder reservoir, as well as we can get in and take a look at the brake switch for the other side. We do know that the brake switch for our rear brake lever is not lighting up our tail light. So once we've got this off, we're going to take off the caliper on the front of the scooter. We're going to check the pads, see how those are looking, make sure everything looks like it's in okay shape. If that's looking all good, then we're going to bleed out the front brakes. I've got my vacuum bleeder set here. Just makes it nice and easy for us to go ahead and power bleed those brakes as one person. Once we've got the front brakes bled, we've got fresh fluid up here, we're going to hope that our front wheel doesn't drag anymore. Taking that caliper apart, cleaning it up a little bit, and then getting fresh fluid in there, we're going to hope that lets our front wheel free spin and not hold us back, not drag on anything. Once we've got the front end of the scooter braking addressed, we'll start looking at the switch on our rear brake lever, and then we'll come on back here, we'll take the rear wheel off, and we'll check the brake shoes inside the drum. Now, drum brakes on a scooter that for who knows how long had a broken brake lever, they're probably fine, but since we're in here, since we're taking it apart, it's important that we make sure everything looks as good as it can. If I need to order brake pads, if I need to order brake shoes, we can certainly address that. We've got a rough looking brake lever up here for the front brake, but that's not a big deal. The whole point of this is to have a little ripper, not a looker. Now, as we get deeper into it, we get it cleaned up, looking nice and fresh. Yeah, we may put a brake lever on, but that's not a priority for us today. With that said, let's go ahead and take a look at what we have to do to get our gauge cluster off of the scooter, and then we'll start diving into the front braking system. To go ahead and get our front cowl here removed, we've got screws here, and then we've got one screw right here and another in the same place on this side. Once those are out of the way, we'll be able to pull this whole thing off, and then we'll have access to bleed our front brakes out of the master cylinder here, not worry about spilling brake fluid on our cowl here. We'll also be able to address the brake light switch that's nestled up in here as part of our rear brake assembly. So that'll be kind of step 2 after we dive into the front brakes. Once we've got that off, then we're going to come on down this way. And we're going to go ahead, we're going to remove our caliper and take a look at the brake pads that are hiding inside of that. When we get to that part, I'll show you what we have to do to take it apart, and then we'll push fresh fluid through the lines, out the bleeder, and get ourselves into a little bit better shape with the front of our scoot here. So the first thing I'm going to do is put a jack stand right here underneath that, just to keep the front wheel elevated, let it free spin for us, and we'll come back and we'll get that cowl off. In further evaluation, we've got a full plastic underbody here, so putting a jack stand under that is just going to put stress on plastic that we don't need to. Instead, we'll come around to the back of the scooter here, we'll drop a ratchet strap right around this and just squeeze the back of the scooter down to the workbench. So once that's in place, we'll get to our cowl. There we go, nothing too fancy, just threw a ratchet strap around the rear rack, down to there, and not even a ton of tension on it. That's still pretty loose, but it's a lightweight scooter. So now, when you look at it from this angle, we've got that front wheel nice and off the ground, and we can see in here the dragging of that front brake. So hopefully this can fix that and get ourselves a free spinning front wheel, and we'll be off to the races to get this scooter on the road sooner rather than later. Now, with our cowl loose, as we saw, it does come off, but it's held pretty tight by the speedometer cable and all the other connections in there. I will point out there's also a small plastic clip right at the front of the nose of the cowl here that you have to sort of pop out when you remove it. Now, if we were doing servicing, we would undo the connections, we'd undo our speedo cable. Since we're not doing that today and we're focused on the brakes, we're going to leave this loose but in place while we bleed out our front master cylinder. Having it loose will make working on the brake switch easier, but we're not going to be able to get it far enough out of the way to make bleeding out the front master cylinder all that easy. So we'll just line it with some blue rags when we get in there. Next step for our project, we've got this loose, is going to be to come down here and take our caliper off of the front wheel, take a look at those brake pads. So let's dive into that. To remove the front brake caliper, we're going to use a 12mm socket, and we're going to remove these two bolts here. Those hold the caliper in place. Once it's off, we'll be able to pull it out and take a look at what the brake pads look like and make sure nothing's too gunked up in there. So let's go ahead and do that now. Probably been a while since these have been undone. If not, since it was first installed. So we'll just go ahead and back those out. And we'll put those off to the side in a parts dish so that we don't lose them. Same thing now on our bottom one. And you can see the caliper's already moving every time I turn the wrench. And I will tell you these feel pretty crusty. So we'll hit them with a wire brush before they go back in, just to make sure the threads are in nice shape. Now that those are out of there, they are the same length and they do have blue Loctite on them. So when we put them back on, we'll make sure to use a little dab of blue Loctite. From here, we can just sort of wiggle out our caliper, and then we'll have it to look at. Pretty well stuck on there, which would be indicative of those pads just being clamped down. Okay, let's take a closer look now. As we can see, things look a little dirty, a little crusty, but overall, when we shine a light on it, we do still have meat on our pads. So those don't need to be replaced right away, although we are getting down on them a little bit. And they were definitely clamped onto the rotor pretty good. So what we're going to go ahead and do is just pull the pads out and make sure that our brake piston looks clean and take a look at what's going on in there. To do that, we're going to go ahead and push our inboard brake pad in so it's free and clear, and then we're just going to try to get it out of there. So it does really seem like our piston is just stuck in the slightly out position here. I could try to put a clamp on there and push it shut. I'm going to spray some brake clean in, put a drip pan underneath, and see if I can't just get these things to free up a little bit and we can pull that off. Just squirting some brake clean up in here, see if we can't do a little something. We have gross liquid dripping out as we do this, and that's okay. We knew this was going to be a messy venture, but a little bit of brake clean never hurt when it comes to this sort of setup. And I'm thinking we're going to be replacing these brake pads soon anyway, so not too bad. There we go. Looks like that sucked in a little bit, and now we can pull out our first brake pad. There it is, looking a bit crusty, but a brake pad nonetheless. And then we'll go ahead and get our screwdriver in there and just see if we can't work this other pad out from the inside. There we go on the top. If we can get the top, the bottom should follow. Maybe we got to give it a little convincing. And there we go. It's loose and it's out. And to take this one, we're just going to go ahead and give it just a little line so I know that this was the inside brake pad. I think they are the same brake pads, but we'll make sure. So let me get things cleaned off and we'll come back. So here are those brake pads now that we've got them cleaned up. Looking a little bit better. Certainly serviceable. There's still some life left in both of them, I think. We'll be able to put those back in the scooter and at least get it stopping for now. Although replacing them, never going to be a bad idea to put in fresh brake pads, especially on a scooter we've had for so long. Our caliper here, still looking pretty dirty. If I sort of slide the piston a little bit. That's pretty crunchy up in there. So we're gonna go ahead and spray things down again, just get it cleaned up a little bit, hit it with a rag, maybe a brush on some of these dirtier areas, and then we'll come back and we'll test to see how our piston moves when we squeeze our brake lever. I think our piston looks pretty good. Still shiny, I don't see any massive grooves in it or anything. You know, it could use us to get in there with cloth, so I'll wrap a cloth around and try to polish the back side a little bit off camera. But when we come back, we're gonna put the brake pads in and we're gonna bleed out this master cylinder. So what I've got here is just some fine grit sandpaper I cut into a strip, and we'll just give this a quick little polish that up. It's a higher grit sandpaper, so it's not going to do too much damage or anything, but it will at least try to break free anything that's stuck around our piston. Another little spritz of brake clean. And that should give us a pretty good shot of getting this back on the scooter and working properly. Look at how nice and shiny and clean that's looking now. Even in here, we're looking cleaner on all of our surfaces. I can brush them up a little bit more if I wanted to. We're not making a show scooter, we're making a running scooter. Before we install the brake pads, I'm just going to take a little sandpaper, clean them up on the back and on the edges where it's going to slide, and then we'll grease it with a little bit of brake grease just to make sure that the caliper and the pads slide nicely, slide the way they're supposed to. We probably should order a brake rebuild kit and redo the seals and things, but for today's purposes, getting that cleaned up and lubricated, that's going to make a big difference. So you can see on the top, I've cleaned this one. On the bottom, I have not. I'll go ahead and clean this one, get them both lubricated, and then we're going to install them here in the caliper. With everything sort of cleaned off, before we address our brake pads, and we're going to go ahead and undo this 12mm here and pull this side of our caliper off. Back that guy all the way out. Keep that nice and clean and off to the side. And now we can pull this apart at the caliper. It's going to be where we have our little dust boots. We'll want to replace this guy here, if you can see it. It's a little crushed in. We've got our clips for our brake pads that fit in like this. But with this all taken apart, we're actually going to go ahead and clean up just a little bit more with some brake clean, maybe a little sandpaper in our brush, and get this set up so we can put it back in the scooter. We've now got our brake pads installed. We're going to put a little lube here on this shaft, and then we're going to reassemble our caliper here. Let that slide nice and free. We're going to come around this way and very carefully, without dislodging our brake pads, get this put back into place here, and then we're going to rotate everything back in gently. We want to keep those brake pads where they're supposed to be. Get our boot lined up, and that is definitely going to have to be replaced. But for today, we're just going to reassemble. Get that approximately where it goes. Take our pin. Just put a little bit of brake grease on that one. And reinstall right here like this. Now we'll tighten that down and mount it back to our caliper. No need to make this too tight for now. We can come back and tighten it up. Our goal now is just to get this slid over our brake disc and then bolted back in place. And then we can come in And that should slide right over our brake rotor. We can take our bolts, and we do need to Loctite these, but for now we just want to hold that in place. Our bolt hole there. And now, we've got a free spinning front wheel. Let's get this tightened up and see if it stays that way. As we tighten this up, remember we are going to put that blue Loctite right where there was some before, just to make sure these things are all held in place nicely. I do like the little gel Loctite Permatex. It works really well, it makes applying it easy. So let's go ahead and get this all put back together. With that, we have a front wheel that now spins. We'll get our brakes bled out, and we'll be able to see if it'll both clamp that closed and release, letting us free spin again. There's a chance that our torn boot here is just not going to let the pads pull free of the rotor once we squeeze it. So I am going to order a new boot for this. I think it's on this side here. But for the time being, we're going to go ahead and bleed the brakes out and see if we can't get this thing to spin and stop the way it's supposed to. Now, I'm not usually one to talk too much about clean workspace, clean mind, but I did clean up our table here. We've got fresh gloves on. So let's go ahead, let's take a look at what we're going to do next, which is crack open our master cylinder up here. We can see it's already a little crusty on the outside. And once we've got that open, we'll dump a fresh shot of brake fluid in right here to our bleeder and suck that out with our vacuum kit. Okay, we've washed off and cleaned off our seal, our rubber cap here as best we can. Underneath that, we've cleaned out the backing of the brake fluid reservoir cap as best we could. We've got that all cleaned up. What I've done is I've tucked some just blue shop rags around here to try to keep any brake fluid from spilling. We're gonna pull this off and set it off to the side where it'll stay clean. Container of our .4 brake fluid. This is what we're gonna be pouring into here as we suck it through our brake system out the other end. So we're just gonna start by topping this up as best we can get it. One thing I do like to do in these cases is I'll poke a big hole here and a little hole up here. And what that lets me do is pour out of the big hole while letting air come into the small hole. It avoids any glugging and chugging and splashing of brake fluid. So all I'm gonna do is go ahead and just top this guy up. So now that we've got a really full reservoir there, we can start pulling some fluid through on the bottom. And then we'll go ahead, we'll start bleeding this out and keep adding more of our brake fluid up top until everything that comes out the bottom is clean. Down here, we've got our vacuum bleeder set up with a little 90-degree over our bleeder nipple. We've got our container for the old brake fluid here. And then, of course, our vacuum pump right here. So what we're going to do is build up a vacuum, just like this. And then we're going to take our wrench and we're going to break loose our bleeder just a little bit. Takes a little bit of energy because who knows the last time that was done. And that should let us now pull our fluid through as we squeeze our brake lever. So squeezing the brake lever is what's going to actuate that master cylinder and push that fluid into our jar. And we can see now it's starting to come through the tube very slowly. But there we go, we've got our old brake fluid starting to get pulled through the line. So we build up some more pressure and squeeze the lever. And as we do that, we can see all the old brake fluid coming through. And we start to see up top, the brake fluid in our master cylinder is getting lower. We're just going to continue on this way, always generating vacuum. And we're starting to see this clear brake fluid coming through, which is a really good sign. So we'll cap that off. Now we're back. I just have this topped off, and we're going to go ahead and just do our final little crack of the bleeder here. We've got pretty much all fluid coming out. So just like this, we've got all clean fluid coming through, bleeding the last of it through the master cylinder by just pumping everything up, keeping that pressure up to keep the air out. We've got all fluid coming through, so we're just going to close this. And now we should have pressure in our master cylinder. So let's make sure we don't spill any more brake fluid than we already have. Let's check up here. We've got nice, good brake feel on our lever. So we'll build that up, and then we're going to just top this off one last time and cap it off. We're going to take, here's our cap, make sure our text is going the correct direction, and slap it back in place. Now we'll go ahead and knock this down. And we now have ourselves a fully bled front brake master cylinder. So, other than needing to replace the seal, we should be all set to go. We'll come back in a few moments after I've cleaned up and see how our front wheel looks when we spin it and hit the brakes. Now that we've had a chance to clean everything up, we're going to go ahead and give this wheel a spin. Nice and free. Build up some pressure on our brakes again. There we go. It releases and it grabs. Little drag in there, but that may sort itself out as we get new brake pads installed. But that's a really promising sign to see that we now have a free spinning front wheel. So what that means is we now know the front wheel spins and stops, the engine starts. We're making pretty good strides here. All right, just like that, we've got a working braking system up front. We've got a working-ish braking system in the rear. We know that the scooter will stop. We also know that the scooter will start. So now we know we've got a running and riding scooter. It needs tires. We're going to have to address a few things on the front end here cosmetically. We still have to deal with our broken blinkers, but that's okay. We're off to a great start, and we're going to bring this episode of Scooter Rescue to an end. I'm going to say thanks so much for hanging out, for watching along with me. If you've got questions or if you're working on a project of this on your own, I'd love to hear about it. Let me know in the comments. But thanks for watching. We'll see you next time.